Okay, so hello YouTube. I'm talking to my friend Jax about the problem of the criterion. I recently did a video which introduces the problem of the criterion, so I'll put up a link to that if you haven't seen it. Um, and but yeah, I mean, there's more to say about it. We were going to have a bit of a conversation about it, so that's my introduction. Is there anything you want to say?
No, I mean you can find my stuff at Unknown Knowns Philosophy YouTube channel, and most of it's on Patreon. But there's some pretty good stuff on the YouTube channel, like a video that Kane's very embarrassed about that you can go
Yes.
watch on
So
there.
I'm just gonna edit this bit out where you like promote that video. So I
All right, thanks a
have the
lot.
power to do that.
Right, thanks, Kane. Uh, I appreciate that. Uh, yeah, so no, there's nothing else I wanted to say except to just get into this problem. I mean, it's my favorite problem in all philosophy and my favorite skeptical challenge. And I think it's interesting because I'd say it's probably the most powerful skeptical challenge that there is, and it gets the least publicity of all skeptical challenges. Maybe besides Hume's argument against reason, that probably even gets even less publicity. But I think that's on account of people just thinking that Hume's argument's bad, even though I don't think that there's anything wrong with Hume's argument. But I don't think anyone thinks that the problem of the criterion is like a bad, question to be asking. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like there's much awareness of it, even though it's such an extremely difficult problem to deal with. So maybe you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, well, I basically agree with that assessment. Um, I mean, just on the basis of my own experience, when I was learning epistemology, we did talk about the problem of the criterion, but it was quite brief. As far as I remember, the introductory textbook that we used had like 2 pages on the problem of the criterion, and and then we discussed it very briefly in the class, but there was never there wasn't like a session devoted to it. It was almost like this kind of just introductory thing that you like draw people's attention to, and then you just kind of move on without really discussing it. And I have found that yeah, when I've spoken to just other people into philosophy who are interested in talking about skeptical arguments, it's not one that comes up quite so much. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I've told you this before privately, Kane, but now including you because you have a PhD now. I have like six or so PhDs who are on my Discord, and I've talked to each of them about the problem of the criterion because it's my favorite problem. And you learn within 5 minutes that even though they have a PhD, they've barely heard anything about it. Like they know probably that same 2 pages and then it doesn't really the knowledge about it doesn't really go much further.
To be fair, though, I
Uh,
mean, I should say
yeah.
that's probably going to be the case with their knowledge of like most philosophical problems. I mean, I feel
Right.
that
Well, yeah. No,
my knowledge,
I know it's an extremely
my
large field, but here's the wait. I just want to say something. So, I don't care what area of philosophy that you're in. Everybody knows about like the Cartesian like evil demon and stuff like that. It doesn't matter what your specialty is. Everybody's like overexposed to things like that.
yeah,
But I mean, to me, that's not even nearly as interesting as the problem of the criterion is.
I
It's
think
like,
yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
think that the problem of the criterion poses a like a much more general challenge because in the case of something like I don't know, should we actually introduce what the problem is, or like we hadn't really discussed the structure of this
I
video.
mean, can't people go to that? Why don't instead of us introducing
Yeah.
it, like go watch Kane's other video?
Okay, yeah.
Like
If you
it's a
don't know
really
what it is, then just go watch the other video. So yeah,
yeah.
I take it that the problem of with Descartes' evil demon, that's a skeptical challenge which is kind of specific. It's really a kind of local skepticism insofar as it's challenging, say, our beliefs about the external world or our beliefs about the past. But it's, I mean, it, like Descartes explicitly thinks that there are going to be some beliefs that escape the clutches of the demon, like beliefs about, say, that I am, like for instance, I am thinking right now. So, and that's the case for like most skeptical arguments, I think. Maybe something like Hume's argument against reason, or the like Agrippa's trilemma. Those end up getting you to a much more general skepticism. But yeah, I mean, the problem with the criterion is going to be something you can use against any belief whatsoever. Any claim anybody makes, you can raise this challenge of the criterion. So
Right,
I take
right.
it that
So,
in that sense, it's much more general and much more powerful.
well, yeah. So, okay. So let me go do a little spiel about how, like, as somebody who's a skeptic, like, I find this kind of annoying that the skeptical challenges that get publicized are the weaker ones. And they're also the ones that like evoke some sort of like supernatural weirdness. So it's like, imagine if an evil demon did this. It's like, so then there's always this thing that people can do to get out of it where they go, well, what, I don't have any reason to think about an evil demon. So it's like, it makes it easy for them to just like dodge the question that those things are asking because the hypotheticals that they evoke are kind of like fanciful. But then you take something like the problem of the criterion and it's very sterile. Like and maybe this is why it doesn't get as much publicity because it's kind of like at first glance it's kind of like a little boring, like it's a little academic. There's not a fun evil demon character thrown in there. And this is also true of Hume's challenge against reason, like his infinite regress challenge where you're going up those vertical steps, which you did a really good video on that also.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, I should promote that. If you haven't seen
Right.
that video on Hume's argument against reason, I'm going to put a link to that in the description as well, so you'll be able to go and see that.
Right.
But,
Right,
yeah.
and then one other video you should promote is that the new meta skeptical challenge. So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
would say like something like that new meta skeptical challenge, Hume's argument against reason, the problem of the criterion. Like these are my favorite skeptical challenges because they have broad application and they don't evoke anything sort of supernatural or weird or like evoke some sort of matrix or oh but like what if you just like you were just created now and 5 minutes ago didn't exist, like these things sort of always kind of evoke things that I think I'm not saying people have good reasons to dismiss them as fantasy, but I think that just like in common parlance or whatever, like these just seem like fantasy scenarios. There's
Hmm.
nothing about the problem of the criterion that seems like a fantasy scenario. It seems just like a plain old problem. But then when you look at the actual scope of it, it's very surprising.
So
So
I think I
yeah,
would also add that I mean, and this is like another reason why I think that it maybe poses more of a challenge than those evil demon ones is you said it was sort of sterile, um, but I also think it's something that just very obviously is something we kind of confront, and maybe people don't necessarily like when people confront it, they might not think about it in terms of the problem of the criterion. But like if you think about, for instance, philosophers arguing about, I don't know, moral realism, right? So you have some philosophers who are moral realists, and they might sort of say, well, look, there's a bunch of just like claims that are obviously obviously true, like the claim that you ought not to torture children, and then if you ask them for like support for that, they might, I don't know, appeal to intuitions, for instance. So, they'll say that, well, we should trust our intuitions. We should trust what seems to be the case. It seems to be the case that it's wrong to torture children. So you sort of have this framework where you have belief in a certain set of propositions, and then that's like supported by an appeal to a particular criteria for determining which propositions to believe. And then against that, you have somebody who's on the more anti-realist side who will like say, right, no, we shouldn't accept that these claims are true, and we shouldn't trust our intuitions. And so, although that's not framed in terms of the problem of the criterion, you can I hope people listening to this can see that actually something like the problem of the criterion is arising there, where we're facing this question of, well, which moral propositions are true, and what is the criteria for determining which are the true moral propositions? And so, the point is that it's not just that, like, it's not just that the problem of the criterion is, as it were, sterile. I think it's that it's something that we do actually have to confront, like all of us, very often.
Right. There's almost kind of like it arises in sort of like practical. I don't want to use the phrase practical philosophy, but it's like and also too, the scope of the problem of the criterion can enter into basically any subset of philosophy or like subgenre. So in philosophy of mind, there's going to be like, what's consciousness? Well, what constitutes it? And anytime you're asking questions about like constitution, we can like run into other kind of problems of criterion around just even definitions of things.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think it's actually something that is going to be ubiquitous, like amongst all fields of philosophy. They're going to be engaging with things that kind of share a resemblance to the problem of the criterion. Like that, it's just going to come up in a wide array. Like no matter what category of philosophy we're talking about, there's something that's resembling the problem of the criterion that's going to pop up.
Yeah.
Um,
So we can perhaps just say, well, we have grounds for simply ruling out the evil demon, or ruling out the dream hypothesis, or ruling out the simulation hypothesis, or whatever, for these skeptical scenarios. But it's not really clear that you can make the same sort of move with something like the problem of the criterion. Just because in practice people actually do have to deal with this, right? So
right. And another thing we should definitely talk about is, so there's certain people. So, this is probably just gonna sound like us being assholes just agreeing, but like so you go on something like the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and once again, just to make a point of how like not well publicized the problem of the criterion is, like it doesn't even have a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article. Like you can only get an article on it on the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is not the same. Like, but so like so you go on the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and there's people who actually believe, and I know there's actual epistemologists who take this seriously, that there's 11 possible solutions. I think the last number I read was 11 possible solutions to the problem of the criterion. And then if you actually spend just like 10 minutes reading through what, the 11 supposedly are, it's just utterly obvious that it's just the original two that Chisholm brought up. Like, it's like none of them are, because it seems pretty clear if you look at academic skepticism enough, that it's just particularism.
Right. Yeah.
So then you have particularism, and then you have the supposed 11 solutions. So get rid of the two. So then there's 9 other supposed solutions. If you just read through them, very quickly you realize that they're all just Methodism. Like with just fancy like they have fancier names, and they try to act like they're like weird hybrids between particularism and Methodism, but they're all just actually just Methodism. Maybe we should talk about like why that is instead of just saying it.
I do actually so in the original like introduction I did talk about this problem for at least one alternative, coherentism, which
right.
Before we recorded this, we did bring up the possibility that maybe we're both just stupid and we're missing something, right? Which is a possibility that I take seriously, but I find it very, very difficult to understand how it's not like. I mean, to me, I look at coherentism, for instance, and it just strikes me as being blatantly obvious that it's Methodism, that you're assuming a kind of criteria for belief where you're saying, well, you believe the propositions that form a maximally coherent set, right? Like that's a method. That's a criteria for belief formation, and so I cannot see how that gets out of that problem. Like I don't see how it's an alternative.
Yeah, and
and it's
I
also
think so. Like,
oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, like, so things like, like applied evidentialism, or like this notion of dissolving the problem. And what's so weird is that I feel like the critique in your video that you gave against coherentism can so neatly, and like the exact same critique applies to applied evidentialism and to dissolving it. Like, because all of these ones that pretend to be hybrids have a particular methodology in which the conjoining of particularism and Methodism works, and their methodologies are all different methodologies, which beg the question against the alternate methodologies. Thus, how the problems escaped, it just doesn't even occur to me how they think that they got around it, instead of just creating yet again another alternative where we're supposed to go, yeah, but why choose this over the other thing? And then we're back right into the problem again.
Yeah, so just to, I guess, fill that out a bit more, I'll just quote something from the IEP here. So there's this supposed alternative response which involves dissolving the problem. And so this is by Robert Amico. And so it involves distinguishing solutions to problems and dissolutions to problems. And I'll just quote now. A solution to a problem is a set of true statements that answer the question that generates the problem and removes the rational doubt concerning the answer to the question. Dissolution occurs when the rational doubt is removed, not by an answer to the question, but rather by recognition that it is impossible to adequately answer the question. So, I mean, like, again, like it doesn't, the exact details of that don't really matter. The point is, it seems pretty obvious to me that what you're proposing there is a kind of method for belief formation, right? Like you have a certain set of criteria for what counts as, solving versus dissolving problems, and then how you form beliefs on that basis. How is that not just Methodism? Like that seems blatantly obvious.
Yeah, it doesn't seem any different than like, proposing empiricism or whatever other brand of Methodism you'd want to propose. Like, here's how we sort stuff, and that's it. Like, this is the methodology for doing the sorting, and then you have a brand of Methodism. So it doesn't. In fact, I'd invite, the four people who are going to listen to this to to actually go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article, read through these, and maybe put in the comments or something if anybody actually truly believes that these aren't just Methodism. Like if you watch Kane's original video and thoroughly understand it, and then go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article, read through it, and read through the things beyond coherentism, they're all just Methodism. But in a blatantly obvious way, to where it's like I struggle to actually I struggle to figure out how serious epistemologists and philosophers actually sat down and came up with these theories, and it didn't strike them within seconds that all they'd done is just created another form of Methodism. It seems like you could figure it out within a few seconds. Yeah. But yeah. Of course, I'm open to the possibility that you and I are just thoroughly idiotic. But it really seems like they're just Methodism. I almost want to evoke some sort of Morean shift or something, and be like, look, it's just so obvious it's Methodism. I have a Morean fact on my hands here with how Methodism it is.
Legit, I actually would genuinely say I'm more confident that these other alternatives are Methodism than I am that I have hands. Right, I'm not even joking about that.
Sure.
I genuinely.
I know you're not joking. I'm not joking. Look, there's really awesome arguments for not having hands, where you listen to them and then you're like, fuck, man, it really seems like I don't have any hands. Like, um, and you know, you can even have experiences where it becomes pretty clear that you don't have hands. So I would say I'm 100% on board with that statement, not actually even being sarcastic or a joke. It's not a joke. Like it's more obvious that these things are methodisms than that you have hands. Like it's just clear. And then so another thing I thought we should maybe talk about the problem of the criterion is that the problem of the criterion basically applies to like any concept or definition of something. So for any
Hmm.
concept or identity or definition of a word that you throw up, you can instantly like apply a problem of the criterion to it. Like it works for basically any concept,
Hmm.
because for any concept that you give, then there's the question of like, well, what what really constitutes X? And then the problem of the criterion arises again, and it's not actually clear that we shouldn't be doing this. So because like think about certain concepts that we've had over time that have changed radically, like let's say the concept or the definition of a word like water, right?
Hmm.
So at some period of time, water was an element, and then I'm sure in some Native American culture, water was what we're talking about, but plus some metaphysical statements about spirits that were involved with the water. You know, that everybody in that culture just knew about those spirits, plus the water, which was exactly what we would know to be water without those, that, spiritualism mixed into it. And then water was an element. Now water, some more specific scientific formulation. But so it seems pretty clear that like over time, it seems like we should be re-examining whether or not we have the right definition for certain words that seem obvious, like the word water. Like, do we really have a thorough? Are we really thoroughly capturing what it means to be water?
Yeah,
And
I think an
then,
important,
yeah,
so just to kind of clarify something here. So I can see a response which would go something like, well, look, when you talk about right definitions, there isn't such a thing as a right definition. Like definitions are just stipulated. So this isn't really a problem because we just kind of stipulate what water is. And that's not something you can be like right or wrong about. I mean, a definition of a word is it's just up to us, right? But I think that there is a kind of deeper issue here, which is that certain like uses of concepts can, it seems, presuppose falsehoods. So like if I say, for instance, like I don't know, if I propose a definition of something like phlogiston, then it might go something like, okay, phlogiston is an element, phlogiston is released by combustion, etc. And I mean that's just definitional, right? That's just what phlogiston is by definition. By definition, phlogiston is just whatever is released by combustion. But turns out phlogiston doesn't exist. Um, so, like, I think in the same way, it's like on the one hand we can just define a word however we want, but if we want that word to be hooking up to the facts, then that's presumably not just going to be up to us. Or at least that's not how most people think of it, right? We Most people tend to think, okay, there are certain facts out there, and then some uses of concepts can like embody false presuppositions in the same way that talk of phlogiston is going to embody false presuppositions. And so a lot of our like learning about the world involves conceptual change. We got rid of this concept of phlogiston and replaced it with oxygen and a whole bunch of other things. And in the case of water, like we've done a similar thing. The concept of water, it seems, has changed over time. Like it's not obvious if you were to give somebody from I don't know, ancient Greece or something, if you were to give them like a cup of D2O, of deuterium oxide, uh, like would they count that as water? I mean, if they were to drink that stuff, it would make them ill. At least if they drank enough of it. So that doesn't seem to have what they would consider probably to be an essential property of water. But like today, a lot of people would just be inclined to say, okay, yeah, that counts as a kind of water. So as we've like learned more about the world, the concept has changed. So yeah, I
Right,
just
right,
kind
and
of
then
wanted to
yeah,
clarify that.
there's other areas where like what a word means is kind of funny. Like, so I remember I read this philosophy of mind paper once where so they like sourced like 70 other papers, and it was this philosophy of mind paper about consciousness, and they had like 70 sources, and I actually like went to each source one at a time, and all of the papers that they were sourcing had a different definition of what consciousness was, but they were citing all these papers as like a support of their definition, yet every paper that they cited had a whole different definition of what consciousness actually was, like 70 different definitions that were like totally like incommensurable with each other.
Hmm.
So I just think like when okay, so when uh, take like any kind of formal system of logic, like the thing that they all share in common, like uh even like the dialetheia people, is that they still have some sort of respect for this notion of like identity. uh but I actually think that identity is where the problem of the criterion is just really interesting, because like where did we get these identities that we're working with in logic? And for each of them we can seemingly have infinite alternates in terms of like maybe like possible credible definitions which are tweaked slightly, and they can change the results about whether we find an argument sound or not. And why are we picking this one definition of a word over another definition of a word? And for each of those, I feel like a problem of the criterion is almost like built into it.
Yeah, just to sort of state this explicitly,
Right,
if we were
right.
talking about water, the problem of the criterion is going to be phrased in two questions along these lines. Question one, what things count as water? Question two, what is the criteria for determining whether or not something counts as water? And it looks like you can just remove the term water and plug in any concept whatsoever into those, and you're going to get a problem of the criterion for that concept. So like, what things count as conscious, right? And what is the criteria for determining whether or not something is conscious? Or, like, what is consciousness, and what is the criteria for determining whether or not something is consciousness? And so yeah, like that's just it. That's just going to be a problem you can ask for anything, for any concept. And so it, in that sense, it looks like any inquiry at all, like at any stage of the inquiry, you're at least going to be able to raise this problem. I don't know, maybe you have a solution to it, but you're certainly going to be able to raise it. So yeah.
Right, and but also too, like I feel like it's underplayed sometimes how much. In fact, actually, if I'm remembering the video you did correctly, it was like somebody's version of what they thought the hardest problem in all philosophy was. I'm trying to remember the video exactly, but basically it was like something to the effect of how it is that you can just reject an argument as unsound, or like someone else can accept it as sound. And like, how is it that these two different like opposing? I'm probably stating this poorly. I don't know how poor your memory is about that video,
I think I
but
remember the thing you're talking about, yeah.
yeah, yeah, maybe you can say it more clearly.
So I could be
Yeah,
misremembering this actually, but
right.
it wasn't me that had cited this as the hardest problem in philosophy. It was somebody else.
No, no,
Um,
somebody else
yeah.
thought it was, but
So
it's actually it's related to what we're
yeah.
talking about, actually.
As far as I recall, I think the problem was something like that. You can have an argument, like, so you have a set of premises P1, P2, P3 for a conclusion, right? But then somebody can come along and sort of uh, somebody can come along and like deny the conclusion and then use that to deny the premises. So you can kind of always like flip an argument, as it were. And then there's this question of like, how do you adjudicate that? So I mean, like in the case of the debate between moral realists and moral anti-realists, like an anti-realist is going to present an argument for the conclusion that there are no moral facts, or there are no stance-independent moral facts. But then a realist will just say, well, there are stance-independent moral facts, and so I'm going to now like select one of your premises to deny. And like obviously, this is just what philosophy is, right? Like people make arguments, then people kind of reverse them. They deny the conclusion, so deny one of the premises, and it's like how do we adjudicate that kind of debate? I might be wrong about this. I think that was
no. I think that is it. But this reminded me of why I even brought this up in the first place.
Okay.
So in terms of this idea about adjudicating stuff, so I don't think it's ever clear that we should give priority to definitions of words that are like baked into the culture or into common usage. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's tons of philosophers who I don't like who think that is exactly what we should do, that we should just like roll with whatever definitions happen to be like the ones that we socially inherited, or like that are in use amongst experts, let's say.
Yeah.
But like, so it just doesn't seem clear to me that the definitions of words that we inherit are necessarily the ones we should be using. And so for like any syllogism you give me, I can look at what's stated and I can look at the words that are used, or like the items and identities that are involved in the syllogism. And I can sort of just gradually alter the definition of that word into some proprietary definition to where it just makes the argument unsound. Even though the word, it's not like I've changed the identity entirely, I've just sort of slightly altered it, or, continually altered it until the argument becomes unsound. And then when you ask me, and then when it comes to adjudicating, like, well, should we be using the person who gave the argument's definition of the word, or should we be using my definition of the word? I feel like once again we're in a problem the Criterion type scenario where it's like, how are you going to? There's no, where's the neutral position you're ever going to find where you're going to be able to say like, yes, that's right. I mean, the only thing that you're going to be able to appeal to is some sort of social norm, or I guess like the norm amongst experts. But I don't think that really gets to the bottom of it. I'm not sure if I'm being clear here.
Wouldn't the response be that if you alter the definition of so like we have an argument that somebody's presented, you can alter the definition of the word so that the argument becomes unsound. Like, I don't know, maybe one of the premises becomes false. But then wouldn't the response just be, well, that doesn't matter because like what we really have there then are two arguments, right? Like the first argument, which is given in accordance with the first definition, is a sound argument. And then we have a second argument that has a slightly different definition that is an unsound argument. But that's not really a problem because, well, of course, if you change definitions, then that's going to alter our evaluation of the argument.
But let's return to this example of like water, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about something where it's sort of just implied that if if we're not trivialists or something, right? It's just kind of implied that one of our let's say we're talking about supposedly the same thing, and it's just the case that one of our definitions is going to be the one that wins out. And so whether the form of the argument still works, that's not really what I don't think that's really what anybody's ultimately interested in. They're interested in is it sound by virtue of matching something in reality, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're back to this problem of like, well, whose word is it that's like properly accounting for what's in reality? But when you look at things in reality, it seems like they can accommodate all sorts of weird little tweaks and alterations. and still sort of just be what you're looking at. And then, well, then who's the arbiter? Like who's arbitrating between these things, or doing the adjudication? It seems like for any identity, we can bring the problem of the criterion up again. But it's not just that. It's like any so you remember in your video when I think it's the end of the video when you were talking about the many problems?
Right. Yeah.
So it just seems to be the case that like our any system we have, like let's say we're a Methodist and we have a method. So like you slowly sort of went through the problems of like what it means to say what sense experience is if we're an empiricist. So if we're an empiricist, like, well, how do we come down on like what actually counts as sense experience? Because it seems like there's so many things you could include or exclude, and like who's who's adjudicating that? Like where is that person who's going to come in and be neutral about something like what counts as a sense experience? It just doesn't seem like there's that person.
Hmm.
But this isn't unique to empiricism. This is basically like any position you can come up with. And it seems like each time you give an answer, the problem of the criterion arises again.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really fascinates me about the problem of the criterion is it doesn't seem like you just have to make a few assumptions to get off the ground. It seems like you actually possibly might have to make infinite assumptions all the time. Like it doesn't seem like it seems like maybe you're always making countless assumptions that are actually never ending if you actually pay attention to what the problem's actually talking about.
Yeah. I wonder if there might be ways around this where, because I was kind of thinking about this issue that like, okay, it's going to kind of come up again and again and again, and so let's say that you endorse something like coherentism, right? And you say, okay, like I'm just going to aim for the set of beliefs that maximizes coherence. Now, okay, maybe that's just a form of Methodism, and maybe that also begs the question and everything else. So, right, we've made our initial assumption, and now, of course, having made that assumption, we face this kind of this second. Oh, hello.
Yeah, hey, there's some person on a bike who's just
Okay.
screaming. Sorry.
No problem. So yeah, we now face this second set of questions where it's like, all right, well, I don't know, what sets of beliefs count as coherent? What are the criteria for determining whether a set of beliefs count as coherent? And then once you answer that, you're going to have to answer another set of questions as well, and so on and so on and so on. But I wonder if the coherentists couldn't say, well, look, the answer to this is always going to be the same. It's always just going to be like whatever maximizes coherence. So there will be certain concepts, right? Certain ways of like drawing lines in the world that count as coherent per my criteria of coherence. Like, so presumably when we say that we want a coherent set of beliefs, we're looking for consistency, simplicity, I don't know, maybe explanatory connections or something like that. And so the concepts that were being used 500 years ago, the concept of water, for instance, that was being used 500 years ago, well, that just doesn't fit into like a coherent system as well as our modern concept of water. So once we get to the point of investigating water, we do have the problem of the criterion arising again, because we can ask what things count as water, what is the criteria for determining whether or not something counts as water. But the answer to that is, again, just coherence, right? It's just a matter of whatever concepts form part of this coherent web. I don't know whether that. So I don't know. Is that like a way of? I mean, I guess it's still going to be the case that there are many problems, but is that a way of saying that there's only one solution? I'm not sure if that's a way that you might reduce the force of this difficulty. I don't know if that made sense, but like,
Yeah, kind of, except for the fact that I think that the coherentist is going to face the exact same problem that you outlined in your video for the empiricist. So it's not just that you have to, okay, you assume coherentism is correct and then you give a definition, but all the components of the definition are going to be faced with the problem of the criterion also. And then all the components for those components and the components for those components ad infinitum.
yeah,
So it's not just that. I don't think it's just the case that you can say, okay, you know, we're just going to use the coherence methodology for each item in the world that we encounter. It's what, what does it mean for something to be coherent? Because whenever you give the definition or the rule set that is, what it means to be coherent, if we dissect and deconstruct all the elements to the rule set, each of those individual items are going to have their own problem with the criterion. And you kind of did an outline of this for empiricism,
yeah, yeah.
but I don't see why you couldn't do it just as easily for coherence.
Well, I think you could. So let's say the coherentist gives simplicity as one of the elements of coherence. Now, in that case, we're then going to face this question of, all right, what beliefs or what theories count as simple, and what is the criteria for determining whether or not beliefs and theories count as simple? But then my thought is, the coherentist is just going to say, the coherentist is going to say, like, the concept of simplicity that we use is just whatever concept. It's, oh yeah, no, this is actually a problem because
yeah, right, exactly.
They're going to say the concept of simplicity we use is just whichever concept like maximizes coherence of our beliefs and criteria for belief.
Yeah, but we don't even know what that is yet because you haven't explained.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So actually,
exactly.
the issue is not just an issue of like begging the question. It's that we don't really know what it is we're talking about.
In fact, we don't really ever know what we're talking about. If you follow the breadcrumb trail all the way down, it seems like we're actually just always winging it, like all systems. And in fact, like ad infinitum, like innumerable times, just winging it. And then if you look at like the go-to ways of like critiquing other people's systems, so like let's say, you're something that isn't an empiricist. I can't think of something off the top of my head, but like you're some
phenomenal
rationalist.
Conservative. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're a phenomenal conservative. So, when you want to critique someone who isn't that, or if you're an empiricist who wants to critique someone who isn't an empiricist, your go-to list of critiques, it seems like what you're critiquing these other belief systems for are going to be things that are actually also true of you if you follow this problem criterion problem down the line. Like, meaning that the go-to critiques that you use of other systems and methods are going to be ones that actually apply to yourself by your own lights if you actually just paid closer attention to stuff like this. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know, unless, so I was thinking about this before we got on the call, like I was thinking of a system that actually like builds into itself, like being anti-reflective.
Yeah.
So instead of reflective equilibrium, it's like anti-reflective equilibrium. So it protects itself from the problem of the criterion by just building into the system that it doesn't get on board with like reflecting about itself. Like, meaning it's actually built into the system that it doesn't address itself or revise itself, and it's actually just kind of static in some sense, and it doesn't think about these issues, and that's actually built into the system. Because here's the thing. Now, what I just said, I mean, to me at least, sounds comical, but if you're actually like sensitive to what we're talking about and you do reflect and think about like the components of what make up whatever method you have, I don't know how you're not going to just come to the conclusion that I said earlier, which you're literally just winging it. You don't even know what constitutes your system. Like, you, like, because if you spent more time examining it, you would go down this problem, the criterion rabbit hole about what constitutes your system, and then you'd realize that you actually never get anywhere. um, sorry to be a downer, but
Yeah.
see, I like conclusions like this, but many people find them to be downer conclusions.
Right. Well, I mean, it suggests that there's just no way to conduct inquiry in anything like a rational way, I suppose. um,
Right.
so,
Yeah, so this was a nice call, wasn't
um,
it?
yeah. So I mean, there was a couple of other things I wanted to bring up because so you're I mean, like I suppose put my cards on the table. I'm not. I don't really consider myself a skeptic, insofar as I don't take myself to be somebody who kind of suspends judgment or even tries to. Um, but you do describe yourself as a skeptic. Now, I'm curious then how you sort of see. In the initial video I did, I drew a distinction between academic skepticism and pyrrhonian skepticism, and I take it that academic skepticism is basically just particularism.
Right.
So
I agree that it is.
you're going to favour
Yeah.
a kind of pyrrhonian skepticism, where the pyrrhonian skeptic just sort of says, "Well, I don't know, I'm not sure." Right? You present the problem of the criterion to the pyrrhonian skeptic, they'll just be like, "Yep, I'm neither asserting nor denying any particular solution to this. I am just in like a state of suspended judgment." So the Pyrrhonian skeptic doesn't make any assumptions. At least they don't make any explicit assumptions. But I wonder if there's some sense in which it also kind of begs the question, at least if it's like presented as in any sense a response, because I mean the natural question is just going to be, well, like, all right, but like why shouldn't I just make assumptions? And certainly the Pyrrhonian skeptic isn't really going to have, they're not going to assert that there's a problem with doing that. So it's like, okay, we have this problem with the criterion, and then I might just say, in response to it, all right, I might just be a particularist and just say, okay, I'm just going to assume a bunch of beliefs. Like, why not? Why shouldn't I just go ahead and do that? It's not really clear that the Pyrrhonian skeptic is going to have anything to say. I wonder if the way to put it might be that, okay, the Pyrrhonian skeptic isn't making any propositional assumption, right? They're not asserting any claim, but in like responding to the problem of the criterion in a particular way, in saying something like "I'm not sure" or "I suspend judgment," I wonder if we could accuse them of sort of making a dialectical assumption about what the appropriate way to respond to the problem of the criterion is. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, as you know, since you made a video about my concept on this, but I'm probably not the most typical Pyrrhonian in the sense that I think that the most interesting thing about Pyrrhonism is to ask the question, what constitutes suspension of judgment?
Yes.
And then if you say I'm not sure to what constitutes suspension of judgment, then it seems like anything actually might be suspension of judgment. Because like what's it supposed to be? Well, the Pyrrhonian is going to say that they're not sure what suspension of judgment is. So it actually could be the case that just assuming a lot of shit is actually suspending judgment.
Right.
So I'm not close to that possibility at all. That could be the best way of suspending judgment, maybe.
I guess
So,
I want to actually connect this to a point we made earlier about when I was talking about coherentism. We saw that the issue isn't simply about how beliefs are justified. The issue is really about like, well, what are we actually even talking about, right? So we saw that with the coherentist, you can say, okay, like what sets of beliefs are simple, what is the criteria for determining simplicity, and you end up kind of deconstructing it more and more to the point where you just don't even know like what simplicity is. You have no way of knowing what coherence is. So what even counts as coherence? And like you get the same thing very explicitly here, where it's like, okay, so what is suspension of judgment? What are the criteria for determining whether something is suspension of judgment? I mean, a Pyrrhonian is just going to explicitly say that they don't know, right? So it seems like everybody is in a position of just not even knowing what their own positions are. I guess the Pyrrhonian is more explicit about that, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If somehow we already have, if we're particularists about honesty, then yeah, maybe the Pyrrhonian's the most honest. So if we somehow have this, particularist notion of honesty, maybe some particularist out there in the universe will go, you know what? Those Pyrrhonian guys are pretty honest. Like, yeah, I mean, but so also I should mention a little shout out to, it's fun. It's really funny when you give a shout out to somebody when you don't know their name. Um, so there's like this guy, I like completely forgot his name, though I want to say that his name is Jack.
Okay.
I think that his name is Jack, but I could be wrong about this. But so he wrote a paper, a philosophy paper for his master's degree, which was based on an argument that I gave. But he formalized it really nicely because I'm an idiot, and he knows how to do that stuff much better. But so he formalized an argument I gave him. But basically, I was saying that it's not just that there's the problem of the criterion. It's just that pretty much everything that's offered up as a solution to the problem of the criterion falls into kind of categories that most people would find like really unpalatable, like if you actually think them through. Like these are things that are standardly viewed as unpalatable, I guess, in philosophy, right, for many people. So when you were bringing up this point about like, well, maybe we could say that there's some sort of, how'd you frame it, that the Pyrrhonian was doing some sort of dialectical
Yeah, so
assumption?
the Pyrrhonian, because they suspend judgment on everything, we take it, I mean, at least standardly, it is taken that they do not affirm or deny any proposition. But then I wondered if we might accuse them of like a kind of like dialectical assumption, or like in the way that they are, like they are responding in some way. So, you present this problem to them and then they're going to act or say something. And then you might say, well, in like selecting that course of action, there's an assumption underlying that, or a presupposition underlying that. I mean, again, it may be difficult to spell out exactly how that works, but that was, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, right. So what I was gonna say is that like, yeah. So my friend wrote a paper for his master's degree based on this argument, and one of the things that the paper pointed out was that it's perfectly like, one response to the problem of the criterion is to just sort of like just flat out say like, yeah, I just make shit up. Like
That's my
I'm
response,
just
by
make
the way, just
yeah.
for just to put my cards on the table.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We label in the paper we labeled that pragmatic fictionalism, which is just to say that you make up stories because you think that it helps you in some way. But the why it's pragmatic fictionalism is that the people who ascribe to pragmatic fictionalism uh, admit that they're just making shit up. Like they just say like, yeah, I make stuff up because I think it's fun. Like so. I wouldn't want to say that that's the wrong, or that the Pyrrhonian method is superior. I don't want to say that the Pyrrhonian method is superior to that, because obviously a Pyrrhonian typically wouldn't say like, yes, this is clearly superior. Pyrrhonianism is clearly superior to other methods. That seems a little weird. But like, yeah. So I think that that's one response. What that paper pointed out that my friend wrote is just that there's many philosophers, Richard Brown, who would find that really like unpalatable. Like, and just find that really kind of like, I don't know, like a gross thing to do. I think it's cool. I like it. I actually think it's a way, once again, being a particularist about honesty. I think it's I think it's a way more honest position in the face of something like the problem of the Criterion to just say like, yeah, I'm not a Pyrrhonian because I have fun just assuming shit and making it up. Like, I like doing that. Why shouldn't I like it? I think I think that's a really cool response. So I'd call that response pragmatic fictionalism. Another response you could give is to just reject this notion at all that criteria should be in competition at all, and then you're a trivialist. Like, you can just reject the notion that like different criteria should even be competing, and you could just say they all win, and then you can be some kind of trivialist. You could do the Pyrrhonian thing where you
So, I
just
mean,
say,
I guess
yeah,
just to clarify the point there, it's that
yeah,
if you're saying in some sense they all win, if you're saying that like all criteria, all imaginable criteria are like appropriate ways of sorting the true propositions into the false ones, um,
right.
then like you're just gonna believe and not believe every proposition. So you're just gonna be a trivialist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, right, exactly. And also, too, that would also happen if you just deny the idea that there was any false criteria at all. Like, meaning you just say, like, look, the whole notion of things being false, like, doesn't exist in some sense. There's ways in which that also can sort of arrive you at some sort of trivialist conclusion. But so trivialism is another an option that people find extremely unpalatable. I think that trivialism is probably even more unpalatable to most people than Pyrrhonism. Um, so yeah, there's like Pyrrhonism, there's pragmatic fictionalism, there's trivialism. So far, all these things are really like gross to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who find all these options like disgusting. um, but then, it's funny. Like the final option that we had in the paper was what we phrased as supremacism, which we chose that specifically to be provocative. But yeah, so supremacism is the idea that
You
like
realize just like you say you chose it to be provocative, but like people will literally call themselves dogmatists. Like they give themselves that label. Like that's not a you know that's not a derogatory
right,
term anymore in contemporary epistemology. They'll be like, yeah, I'm a dogmatist. So you know
right,
I don't know if
right,
supremacism
yeah.
is going to bother people
I
that
mean, do
much.
people do that? Do Are there people going around right now saying like, "Yeah, I'm a sophist"? Like, I guess people. I mean, I guess maybe somebody. I mean, the sophists said they were
Yeah.
sophists. I mean, so yeah, okay. I mean, that's weird. Okay, but here's the thing. I want to. What was that video with Lance Bush where you're like, "Let's make moral realism embarrassing again"?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
he
want to
chose
say,
that
let's.
title.
Yeah, I'd say let's make dogmatists supremacists because I like it. I think it's funnier if they have to call themselves that. Like, yeah, dude, I'm a supremacist. um, so why supremacism was chosen was just to say that like even in the face of all the stuff that we just talked about and how like
Aren't you a
seeming
little bit concerned that like supremacism is like there's also kind of like an art movement associated with it that actually is kind of cool. Whereas I don't think dogmatism has got that.
yeah, look, Kane, like the okay, the fact that like so, okay, the fact that like you and I would get that reference is, I'm not really concerned about the other people who get that. I mean, for those people, good luck to you. Like, that's cool that you know a weird art movement. Um, but no, I'm not really concerned with them. Like, I actually used to use this phrase, stuckism, and I used it before I actually even knew that there was a British art movement that was actually called stuckism. And then I learned what the British art movement called stuckism was, and then I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm still using this phrase, and I'm pretending like they don't exist because their artwork sucks. Um, yeah, but yeah. Anyway, so what supremacism is, because I didn't even get to say what it is yet. It's just to say that like, even in the face of all this, I just know I'm right. And how I know I'm right, I don't give a shit. I'm right. And also I'm not only right, but like I'm more right than you. And how do I know that? I don't fucking know. I'm more right than you. I mean, well, they'll say that they do know how they're more right, but really, I think I think it actually comes. I mean, this is. I think it has to just come from just blatantly just ignoring the stuff we talked about. Like, I don't know how you come to a supremacist position uh, without just ignoring all the stuff we talked about. Unless, like I said earlier, that you just build in some sort of anti-reflective quality into your system, and you say, like, look, it's actually just a better worldview to just move forward and do shit and not think about why you do it.
I
Don't
wonder
question.
I
Yeah.
wonder if they might try to do a sort of pragmatic justification for it, like because you know so with like the responses to something like the problem of induction, Reichenbach
Right.
gives this sort of pragmatic response where he's like, well, you know, like maybe we don't know whether we're in a world where induction works or doesn't work, but like we should just assume that it does work, because like you know, like if we're in a world where it does work, then assuming it does work is going to get us to the right beliefs. Assuming it doesn't work isn't going to help us. If we're in a world where it doesn't work, we're kind of screwed anyway. So like we might as well just assume it does work. And I guess like I wonder if you could sort of do a similar thing for like a supremacist position where you say, okay, like either we're in a world where I guess inquiry is going to get us somewhere, or we're not. If we are in a world where inquiry is going to get us somewhere, then you know we like assuming that we get at the truth, is going to allow us to have these true beliefs. If we just suspend judgment, we're going
Yeah,
to go nowhere. On the other hand, if we're in this other world, then you know we're screwed anyway. So might as
I
well,
see a couple
yeah,
problems with this response. First of all, it assumes a kind of supremacism that I just think is way too broad. Like you're saying like something about just like generally inquiring. Like I feel like that leaves out that all the forms of supremacism are actually in competition with one another. They're all like vying to say like, dude, I'm practical.
yeah,
You're not so practical. It's me. They're all making this claim. So now if I'm some neutral person standing outside of it, how am I supposed to pick? They're all saying that they have all these practical benefits. And then yet still I have a person named Kane Baker who seems to be living his life, eating bread just fine. And he seems to be having a fine life, and he's basically telling me that he just makes everything up.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I do actually think that if you you know from even from the point of view of this pragmatic argument, it's not really clear to me why that would favour supremacism over over the pragmatic fictionalist, as you put it. Uh,
right. Right, exactly. So that's why supremacism is really weird, because it seems committed to. I really think that a supremacist, the way I'm phrasing it, which I guess you could say is like a person who's just a straightforward dogmatist, but I'm going to call him a supremacist. This person to me, it in the face of the not just the problem of the criterion, but what we could call like the many problem of the criterion, meaning like the ad infinitum problem of the criterion that just keeps popping up over and over again. I feel like a supremacist or a dogmatist is actually committed to like being anti-reflective about that. Like they have to just not reflect about it. If they did reflect about it, I don't see how they wouldn't just morph into a pragmatic fictionalist and go like, yeah, I know at the bottom I just make all shit up. But like, isn't it cool we can like fly a rocket, or I don't know, like what they're gonna point to, but like
mhm.
I just don't see how the position isn't just committed to ignore, like it just prima facie seems to me like it's just going to ignore stuff. It has to. Otherwise, how's it making that claim? I don't know how it does that. I mean, maybe you could think of some more responses.
Well, I think as well. I mean, another issue with the with this attempt to give like a pragmatic justification, is that it seems to sort of assume that like the only way we can go is to engage in inquiry which involves like asserting and assessing propositions. But it's not really like, I mean, just prima facie, that doesn't obviously seem to be the case. If somebody asks, a question, for instance, I mean, this is something you've brought up quite a lot in private conversations. Anyway, it's like, well, you don't have to respond to the question by uttering a proposition. There's all sorts of things you can do. Like somebody might ask a proposition, and then I respond by hitting them in the face. Or if I'm not so violent, maybe I respond by like raising an eyebrow or something like that. So in this case, we're still engaging in communication. You don't even have to engage in communication with people. You don't even have to attempt to do that. But there's all sorts of other things that we can do that don't involve uttering propositions. And I think when you so if you take these sort of skeptical challenges seriously, it really isn't obvious why believing, assessing, inquiring into propositions is going to be the right way of thinking at all. It's not obvious why that would be the right way of learning anything about the world. I think that one of the problems with this pragmatic justification is that there are so many different kinds of supremacism. But then the other problem is that there are so many alternatives, just alternative ways of thinking, which might be for all we know, maybe those are better ways of learning about the world than asserting propositions is.
But besides just talking to you many times about how about how you don't have to answer questions with words, another thing we've talked about is so I just don't even buy this claim that that something like pyrrhonism doesn't have its own pragmatic value, and in fact might even have more pragmatic value than all these other systems. So I don't take it that something like pyrrhonism is just impractical. This doesn't strike me that way. If you spend time seeing what it would actually, how it would actually play out if you suspended judgment about pretty fundamental things, I think that the results actually can be very pragmatic. And so now you don't have just supremacism and pragmatic fictionalism vying for who's the practical pragmatic one. Now they're competing also with pyrrhonism. So who am I supposed to believe? Meaning if you step back to this neutral zone, Did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, so now it's not even a competition between the supremacist and the pragmatic fictionalist. Now, we can look at whether pyrrhonism actually has practical applications and is pragmatic in its own right. And in fact, actually, for people who don't know this, the historical origins of pyrrhonism actually was as a competitor to Stoicism, and pyrrhonism was an alternate methodology to basically live a really happy life, which many people might see as a very practical or pragmatic goal.
Right.
So yeah. So you see what I'm saying? So now I'm biased obviously because we have very similar worldviews in certain respects, but I don't see what supremacism has going for it at all. It just seems I guess one thing it has going for it is if you want to be a dick on purpose, it seems like the best move to make. And being a dick on purpose is kind of cool. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? That does kind of there's a kind of attitude towards it, to it. I'm right.
Right.
For no reason at all. It's kind of cool to say that you're right for absolutely no reason. It's pretty cool. You gotta hand it to them. And I was just thinking too that so what do you make of this idea? So I kind of want to talk to you a little bit more about this, this idea that for anything that you're investigating in the world, it seems like you could always also be spending that time like sort of investigating your own system.
Mhm.
And it seems like there's this kind of sense, at least the conclusion from this conversation is that the more time you spend investigating your own system, the more brittle it seemingly becomes. And so you get this more and more brittle system the more you investigate your own system. And then it kind of seems like we almost have to put in clauses for you to not do that. Because if you keep doing it, then it starts to become a little weird. Like, wait, that's right. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm totally clueless. Like, I really do just make all this stuff up. Like, so that can be a little depressing or something. So it seems like uh, there's got to be like these breaks or something that are put on, but they're weird because to me they sort of resemble the things that religious people do, or like what I would see religious people as doing, which is they go to a certain level of inquiry and then they hit the brakes and then they just say like, I'm not going to question God. Like what? Like I'm not going to ask like what? Why would I do that? Like God knows what he's talking about.
Well,
I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Like
I suppose there might be. So the way that I have tended to see this in the past is just like um, if I'm engaging in some sort of debate with somebody, then I'm going to hope that there's just certain things that we're both presupposing, and then in that context, I don't really need to question it. So like if I'm debating somebody who believes in God, then it's probably the case that we're just both assuming something along the lines of that perception gives us an accurate picture of the world or something like that, right? Or maybe not even an accurate picture, but like we can, I don't know, infer true claims about the world on the basis of perception. So, um, there's like this kind of shared background assumption in that, and then maybe I can use that to like get through to them or to, yeah, to sort of challenge their assumptions. Um, Now, if it's just me alone, just sort of asking, well, where do I go with my inquiries? Do I just focus on my system or do I like try to develop the system? I don't really see why there would be any preference one way or the other. I mean, of course, if I decide to start developing my system, I'm going to have to make a whole bunch of assumptions. But notice that that's actually also the case when it comes to questioning your system, because you can raise a problem of the criterion with respect to like how you go about questioning your own system. Like, because you can ask like, well, what does count? Yeah, like, so what is like a legitimate questioning of one's own system, and what are the criteria for determining whether or not something is a legitimate questioning of one's own system, right? Like, whatever
right.
way you go, you're actually just you're gonna keep facing like these problems of the criterion. They're just gonna keep re-arising. There's no way out. So I actually quite liked it when your response, which for some reason YouTube removed, but you called it in a response on my video. You said it should be called the just give up problem, right? like, uh, so like we can't say, oh well, one thing we can do to avoid this or to like deal with it appropriately is to question one's own system. Actually, that doesn't get around it either. You're going to face it just as much doing that. So, like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, so like you're in this weird like I feel like there's like a really good uh I guess maybe like one thing that the supremacists could say that they have going for them is that like when a person has admitted that like they just make all this shit up, like I would say you tend to admit like if a person admits that they're just making this shit all up, I think a supremacist might be able to say that the worry is that like it's going to be hard, like there's going to maybe some like contractual argument is going to be put in here where it's like, look, if you're the kind of person who admits that and I'm doing business with you or whatever, like there's this kind of sense where I have no clue like what to expect because you're just gonna be this like rascal like character where I can't pin you down, and then like even this dude knows he just makes it all up, so I can't like, there's no way to really know what angle you're gonna take next. But once again, I see that this response from them has another problem because I don't think that there's anything in principle of being a pragmatic fictionalist that means that you have to like be this constantly changing, like shape shifting. Like it seems like you could have a very consistent fiction that you just admit is completely made up. So
Yeah, I mean, people like have very some people have very specific aesthetic tastes, for example, like, and if they're like if somebody is literally writing a fiction, like somebody's literally writing a novel, it's not like when you pick up a novel, you just have no idea what's coming next. You often can predict, broadly speaking, like the sort of style and certain things about the characters are going to remain the same. I mean, you might not be able to predict it exactly, but like there's a sort of general structure and overall plot and characters and so on that are going to be stable. So I don't know. I just don't. Uh, I also would say that like I've actually, I mean, met people who would count as supremacists by your definition, who like change their views all the time, and they just would say, "Well, I was wrong in the past," like, but I'm right now, like, and I'm like objectively correct, objectively stance independently correct right now.
yeah, these are
uh,
the same kind of people who tend to believe in induction but don't believe in the induction about their own wrongness over time. like, like they think that induction is objectively real, yet when it comes to all the times that they're wrong in the past, they think that this right is going to be the real one. Like, now I'm really right this time, and induction's real, except for this, except for this instance of me constantly being wrong about when I'm right. Um, like, yeah, I mean, but like, so I feel like I wonder if like we're doing too much like what do they how do they say it in the United States? They call it inside baseball. You guys don't have that term.
no, I don't know that.
Uh, yeah, inside baseball is like so like sometimes worry about in this call like whether we've talked about this privately so much that we're having our own conversation and not actually even including anyone in the audience.
Yeah, that's possible. I did wonder that because this has just been totally like unstructured. I'm wondering if somebody who like just isn't really aware of, yeah, if anybody other than us two is really going to be able to make sense of it. But I'm not that bothered about it, to be honest. Look, I'm going to put this up anyway, and there's
Right.
content here, and maybe somebody will be able to get something out of it. Maybe they won't. Whatever. Like,
Right. I mean,
we can do like another recording of this if you
yeah,
want.
yeah. Here's the no. I don't want to. I think this is the recording, but
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy with it. I think it's fine. The only thing I want to say is like, if you don't know what Kane and I are talking about, I'm just gonna go back to this Morian fact thing where I feel like if you follow the breadcrumbs, if you actually think this problem through and apply it to your own system, you just are gonna, if you're honest with yourself, you're just gonna come to realize that you're making shit up. Like, and that's the Morian fact, not fucking anything about hands. It's not about hands. It's the Morian fact is actually about how like if you follow through, this is the same way where I did want to briefly mention this. People say that Hume's argument against reason is a bad argument. It's not a bad argument. Every response I've ever seen to Hume's argument against reason is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I
They're all
agree.
bad. Yeah, Eric Switchbowl did a whole blog post about it, and it was like every response he gave was just so bad. It was really bad. And it's funny because I actually on Twitter sent Eric something about how it's comforting to know that even artificial intelligence can't bypass Hume's argument against reason because you would need infinite energy resources to go through all the infinite regresses. So So even the AI wouldn't be able to contend with his problem, just because even artificial intelligence would have to, in principle, continue to go to the
Yeah.
infinitely. So, and what's funny is that Eric thought he liked as far as I could tell on Twitter, he thought that was a really cool thing to say. And then literally like a week later, he posted this article about why Hume's argument against reason is terrible.
Well, I
And then
guess you prompted him to think about it, and he obviously changed his mind.
right,
Yeah.
right, except for the fact that when you and I both read through it, it's just clearly Hume is he's still dad, or Hume's
He's the
everybody's
top dog.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hume's still top dog. Sorry, Eric, but Hume's still better. His argument is just. In fact, I think even didn't Hume even say about that argument that yeah, it's a flawless argument, or he compliments himself and
Yeah, I mean, he's right though.
yeah.
I think there is this weird thing that sometimes happens, and I don't know, it happens. It seems to happen a lot actually with skepticism, because it's with the problem of the criterion. There's just this kind of consensus that yes, of course, there are a whole bunch of different responses. Of course, it's not just particularism and Methodism. There's 11 different responses. That is now known. And then with Hume's argument against reason, the first thing that every professional philosopher says about it is, yeah, well, of course that argument doesn't really work. That's a bad argument. And you read it and you're like, I don't know. It seems watertight to me. I mean,
Right.
and all the responses seem just obviously terrible.
Right. And here's another thing that I see as really related between Hume's argument against reason and the problem of the criterion is that this is more true of Hume's argument, but just give me a second, maybe I can lay this out. So what I think is interesting about Hume's argument against reason is he kind of gives you a challenge and asks you to do something, where you go up these vertical levels of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually take Hume's argument against reason as an actual challenge that you can participate in. So you can actually sit down with a piece of paper or a computer and write out a belief that you have and what confidence you have in it, and then you can go through these layers of vertical assessments of your own confidence in your reason, and you can actually do what Hume's asking. And if you actually participate, as opposed to just think about his argument, you actually participate in doing what he's asking you to do, you realize very quickly that there's no way out and that you're just fooling yourself. But you only get that through participating in this process of doing the vertical assessments.
I have a suspicion that people don't do it. I think that they kind of think they're presented with this argument, they think about it intellectually, and you can kind of come up with responses maybe, but I agree with you. I think that there is a certain there's a feeling that you get when you actually sit down and do this. And I mean, to me, it's a feeling that impresses itself upon me much stronger than the feeling I get when I look at what appear to be hands. If I sit down with the claim that I have hands, and I can have my hand right in front of me as I'm writing, and then I go through this process that Hume suggests. I think he says that the mind runs into a fog or something like that, and that really is how it feels. It's you feel things just start to slip away and disappear, and
right, yeah, right. So yeah, and it's funny. So I think that people don't do this, but maybe we could be the first two idiots to propose something like this. I think that the problem of the criterion can actually be phrased or framed in this exact way that we just talked about Hume's argument against reason, which is that you can actually frame the problem of the criterion as a challenge to actually participate in, which is do the infinite regress of the problem of the criterion that keeps re-arising each time so take a system. If you're an empiricist, take that. If you're a coherentist, take that, and actually break down the component parts of your system and keep applying the problem of the criterion to them and then see where you actually wind up. Like when you actually go through the process of doing that over and over and over again, you actually wind up exactly where we talked about at the beginning of the call, where you just realize that you actually don't even know what you're talking about. Like you don't even know like what you're saying. Like, but you confidently strut around all the time like you do. Like, you know, like, but if you do an experiment like this, you get a visceral sense that like, holy shit, like I don't know what I'm talking about at all. Like as soon as I actually like examine the component parts. And I think a good example of this is actually just watch Kane's original video on the problem of the criterion and look at the way he does it with empiricism. He only does like three phases of it. But you could actually do, you could do 30 phases of it. You don't have to just do three. You kind of stopped after three parts in the video.
Yeah.
But you could do it 30 times in a row and see where you wind up and see if like you think that like your system is actually like as accountable as you think it is, like, or because here's another thing. It's like, so sometimes I'll use this example, like, so people in the audience might be familiar with like the software Photoshop, right?
Right.
Oh, it's pretty famous. Like, so the people who make Photoshop make like a really like generally useful program. It's very generally useful, but there's like thousands and thousands of plugins that are made by third parties to enhance Photoshop. And they're like these modules that don't have anything to do with like the way Photoshop's programmed. They're sort of like third party little giblets that get like glued onto Photoshop to like enhance it in certain ways. I just don't understand how like you could be an empiricist or a coherentist and not think that there's always going to be like this module from outside your system that's going to be needed at some point. Same way with Photoshop, where it's like, oh yeah, Photoshop's so useful, it's so great, but then you hit a wall at a certain point, and then you got to get this third-party module, glue it into Photoshop, and it's all weird, but it doesn't really follow the rules that Photoshop follows. It's kind of like a whole different thing. And so I don't understand what these systems like empiricism or coherentism or just, like I'm a rationalist. Like, I feel like you always encounter things like in your life or in reality where it requires like some sort of third party module to come in. Like, oh, I thought I was an empiricist, but it actually turns out that I need to like reach outside of empiricism and grab this thing instead because the problem just doesn't work using this homogenized method. And so in this sense, like when people think like they've got like this like panacea way of thinking about philosophy, if you run this experiment of doing the problem of criterion infinite regress on your system, I feel like you can come to find like right away that your system isn't like this catch-all thing. In fact, it's like totally not thought out at all. It's like actually like there's huge holes in it. Like there's all these gaps where you're like, wait, I didn't even know how I was defining things here. Like I'm just totally lost. Like, sorry if that was a weird tangent, but
Well, I suppose, I mean, the way that to speak up somewhat for these sorts of systems, I don't really know if I should even call myself an empiricist anymore. But like, the way that I had been inclined to think about it was more that, I'm choosing to adopt empiricism, right? Like I'm planting my flag in empiricism, and I'm choosing it not because I think, okay, like I can say that I believe that it is correct. It's more that it's more like a kind of like political statement in a way. It's like I'm choosing to endorse this project and contribute to this project. So there is a certain way of approaching things as an empiricist and a way of trying to. So like I take it that part of empiricism is like a resistance to trying to account for the success of particular discourses and practices by postulating like entities beyond what we can experience. So like an empiricist is going to resist the idea that we should account for like moral practices by postulating, I don't know, abstract moral values or whatever. So like there's this general project, and I mean, I don't even know how, and I've never really known how to give a robust empiricist account of mathematics, say. But I'm kind of happy to just call myself an empiricist and leave that up to other people, right? Like I can like be an empiricist with respect to, morality and the sciences, and I can work on those parts of the project. I'll let other people work on different parts of the project. So I guess I would have always agreed that empiricism has loads of holes, but that I don't know if I would have seen that as a problem. I would have just seen that as, well, yeah, like there's this intellectual tradition, and I'm hopefully going to contribute to the development of it. In many ways, you maybe want it to have holes, because if it's got holes, then there's things you can do in the future. There's progress to be made. Like if it was just if the system was just like a perfect little gem that had no problems at all, then there's nothing to do, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's important to have fan fiction.
Right.
Fan fiction is important for the pragmatic fictionalist. Got to have some fan fiction to fill in those holes. And we all know, like, that filling in holes is very important.
Right.
Philosophically speaking, and in every other sense.
Right.
Right. So I think maybe we should leave it on that. maybe we should end this on filling in holes.
Okay.
This is a good way to close.
I've been talking to my friend Jax. Jax by name. Jax very regularly, right?
But yeah, that's not even how you say my name, and you know it. But okay.
Wait,
right,
what?
Yeah.
Sorry, like what? You think there's like correct ways of saying names now? What is
right?
it?
I actually think that in enforcing the correct pronunciation of names is the best way of suspending judgment, in my opinion.
Okay.
All right. Okay,
right.
Kane. It was nice talking to you. Let's keep talking after you end the recording.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say goodbye to the listeners. Thanks for watching.
Okay.
If you got this far, that's it.
And also, I want to add before you finally close out that I'm actually banned from Kane's Discord because I'm too cool for his Discord. Like, I'm actually too cool for his Discord.
Well, you were banned for being an ass is the specific reason that was given. So,
right.
But yeah, anybody else is welcome to come on my Discord.
Except me.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Goodbye, everybody.
Okay.